Hello and welcome back to F1 Every Week. I am your host Ben Wevel, and today I'm going to be rounding up all of the major news stories over the past month, including the messy month of December for team principals across Formula 1, as well as some key reserve driver updates and the cancellation of a Grand Prix. You can listen to the podcast on the streaming platform of your choice, including Spotify, YouTube and Apple Podcasts. And now, without further ado, let's get into episode 83. First off this week is the team principal recap. Every off-season in F1, it seems that a new team principal drama comes to the forefront, be it the messy ending of the relationship between Marcin Budkowski and Renault last year, or Otmar Szafnauer's surprise exit from Aston Martin the same season. But this time around, as with the summer break driver move Bonanza, there have been more shock changes than ever before. Starting off with the earliest, least surprising and most high profile, the resignation of Mattia Binotto. After the shambolic year in terms of strategy and capitalising on success, there was no shock from the F1 world when Binotto stepped down as team principal on the 29th of November. However, not only did Binotto relinquish his role after 4 years at the helm of the Scuderia, but he decided to call it quits with the Maranello-based outfit completely, following 28 years' worth of dedication. It was revealed by Ferrari that multiple members of the board, including Chairman John Elkann and CEO Benedetto Vigna, did not have faith in Binotto's continued leadership, after he was unable to produce a Constructors' or Drivers' Championship in 2022, despite a very promising start to the season. After 2 weeks' worth of speculation, Ferrari confirmed that Fred Vasseur would replace Binotto as team principal from January 2023, leaving his role as CEO of Sauber Motorsport and head of Alfa Romeo after 6 years for the team's engine supplier, Ferrari. Vasseur has been a part of the motorsporting landscape for more than 25 years at this point, and he will bring a true menagerie of knowledge on how to run an effective team. He is also the team's first team principal brought in from outside of the squad since 2007 and the end of the John Todt era, signifying that Ferrari are definitely prepared to make major changes in order to improve their position in the sport for the coming years. So that now left a space vacant at Alfa Romeo as well, and in another shock move, Andreas Seidl, the infamous McLaren team principal for the past 4 seasons, decided to make the switch to Sauber to act as CEO. This may be a step back down the grid when considering this year's Constructors' Championship, in which Alfa Romeo ended up in 6th place, whereas McLaren were ahead of them in 5th, but certainly this is an internal promotion, as Seidl will now have far more responsibility off the track as well as acting CEO. These duties including the selection of a new team principal for Alfa Romeo. Despite the surprise for McLaren fans, this change may have been inevitable, as Seidl was heavily linked with Audi following their decision to join the sport as an engine manufacturer and constructor in 2026, having worked with their fellow Volkswagen Group team Porsche from 2013 to 2018. Despite the significant boost in funding thanks to Audi's entry for Alfa Romeo and Sauber, Alfa Romeo will be leaving at the end of 2023. Sauber will act as a loan team for 2024, 2025, and then in 2026, Audi will come in, leading to a boost of funding. But I would be surprised if this boost monetarily makes an impact straight away. So Seidl may have to bide his time for the next half-decade before a championship shot can be realised. But on the other side of things, this is a massive loss for McLaren, with one of the most influential team members of that squad stepping away. However, Seidel's exit would make room for Andrea Stella, a key member of the departing's inner circle, and former performance director. Before his move to McLaren in 2015, Stella worked at Ferrari for 14 years, with the likes of Alonso, Raikkonen, Schumacher, and even Valentino Rossi in his time with the team, proving that he can match the standards of some of the best of that generation. Finally, in the team principal roundup is one of the most out-of-the-blue moments this year. The entirety of the Williams upper management was skewed on the 12th of December. Both Jost Capito, former CEO and team principal, as well as the former technical director, Francois Xavier de Maison, both of them elected to leave Williams. This is after only 2 seasons worth of leadership from Capito, a figure who many assumed would be part of Williams' climb back up the grid for many years to come. And unlike the other teams I've mentioned, Williams have been unclear as to who their successor might be for either of these roles, which may suggest that the organisation at the very top of the Williams company, which Frank and Claire decided to step away from in mid-2020, may be slipping away. Next up is some reserve driver news, some of which I've touched on lightly in the past, but I'll go into more detail on it now. So, first off, only a week into the off-season, it was confirmed, as many suspected, that Daniel Ricciardo would be returning to his old team of Red Bull as a third driver for the 2023 season, after being displaced from McLaren by the incoming Aussie Oscar Piastri. Ricciardo was part of the Red Bull Junior team from 2007, making his way through the formulas with Red Bull and claiming his first role in Formula 1 as test driver for Toro Rosso, Red Bull's sister team, in 2011. He secured 7 of his 8 race victories in the sport with Red Bull and 29 of his 32 podiums, finishing third in the championship on 2 occasions with the Austrian outfit. However, as we now know, and as was very clear during his tenure at Red Bull, the relationship between team and driver broke down after it was made clear that Max Verstappen was the number 1 driver, with the blame often landing squarely on Ricciardo's shoulders when incidents occurred, such as that infamous one in Baku where both of them took each other out down the main straight. This led to Ricciardo leaving the team at the end of the 2018 season for Renault, with whom he had one of his best years to date in 2020, securing 2 podiums and 5th place in the championship in the 5th best car on the grid. But after a desultory 2 years with McLaren, in which Daniel looked a shadow of his former self with only a couple of flashes of brilliance, including that amazing victory at Monza, he is, as Christian Horner put it, coming back home. At the time, this move somewhat surprised me, as Daniel is returning to a team with which he had so much discourse, but I do still believe that he could have proved himself as a titan of the sport had he remained at Red Bull in the first place. Who knows, maybe he could get a second lease on F1 life with Red Bull once Sergio Perez eventually retires, or possibly even moves elsewhere if he continues to lag behind Verstappen for the remaining 2 years of his contract. In more recent reserve driver news, it was announced on the 15th of December that Mick Schumacher would be replacing the AlphaTauri-bound Nick de Vries as Mercedes reserve driver, as he was displaced from Haas by Nico Hülkenberg for the 2023 season as well. It is clear from Mick's first 2 years in the sport that he is exceedingly prone to incident and accident, with numerous costly crashes holding Haas back from their true potential this season. So, like De Vries, Mick may need a few years of preparation in order to hone his craft and come back stronger later this decade. Nick De Vries and Mick Schumacher, both Formula 2 world champions. It almost seems too soon to be considering the 2023 season, but it seems that Aston Martin are truly jumping the gun this year, having announced their car for next season. The AMR 23 will be releasing on the 13th of February. This reveal will occur in front of a small audience at their current base in Silverstone, soon to be developed into a £200 million campus of engineering. Aston Martin are clearly eager to make up for a somewhat disappointing season in 2022, which saw a 22-point step back from 2021. The team maintaining their 7th place in the championship, despite sitting at 9th until a last gasp point influx. This year may have been a turning point, may have to be a turning point for a team who won races and secured regular podiums in 2020, as Lawrence Stroll laid out some very hefty expectations for the following years at the start of 2021, some of which have not yet, in fact most of which have not yet come to fruition. So hopefully this sign of eagerness should be a sign of something more positive to come for Aston Martin in the future, which should hopefully be, the chances should hopefully be improved by the addition of Fernando Alonso, the two-time Formula 1 world champion, for next year as well. In administrative news, the FIA recently announced the cancellation of the 2023 Chinese Grand Prix due to China's zero-COVID policy. Next year's Grand Prix would have seen a return to the Shanghai International Circuit for the first time since 2019, and would have made next year the season with the most F1 races in Formula 1 history, with 2024. However, there is still hope for this record, with many races available as replacements. The most likely include Portimao, which was present on the calendar in 2020 and 21, as well as Istanbul, another track which stepped up to the plate in the COVID-stricken years. And Paul Ricard as well, which relinquished its place on the calendar for next season earlier this year, after the French Grand Prix. But there are some more fringe options which the FIA may select, including either of the German circuits, which I believe to be a glaring error in omitting either way, or even maybe the much-missed Sepang, which many F1 fans have been crying out to get back onto the calendar. Another option is not to replace the race at all, but this would create a gap of 4 weeks between Australia and Baku on the calendar, a de facto spring break for F1. To have such a gap so early in the season would seem somewhat odd for the FIA, but who knows, they've done stranger, including the next piece of news from the past weeks. In one of the most baffling moves from the FIA in the past few years, and there have been some confusing ones, F1's adjudicators decided to ban drivers from making quote-unquote political statements of any kind, without the approval of the FIA itself. This has caused uproar in the F1 community, as it would prevent the likes of Lewis Hamilton and the now retiring Sebastian Vettel from spreading their extremely socially positive message to the rest of the world. This has raised many questions about the FIA's validity and has caused many to consider whether the entire system, frankly, is outdated. A plethora of individuals, some not even involved in the sport, would argue that what right does the FIA have, frankly, to filter the political opinions of their drivers, especially when they themselves have introduced a number of measures which support liberal ideas, such as We Race as One, as well as permitting drivers to kneel during the national anthem in the past few years in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. However, on the other side of things, one could argue that F1 is a business, and that they should have control over what they broadcast to millions, and that this new clause in the sporting code also prohibits the use of hateful messages within F1. But this idea isn't very realistic, as any driver who decided to display hateful ideas or imagery on t-shirts, overalls or cars would probably be cancelled immediately by Twitter, or removed from their team, or both, as has been seen from the likes of Yuri Vips over the past few years. In my opinion, this is a bit of an autocratic move from the FIA, and messages of socially positive nature, in my opinion, have a place in all sports. The FIA will likely levy a fine for any driver who disregards these rules, and similarly to the bizarre jewellery incident last year, the pants and piercings, I hope that the likes of Lewis Hamilton can pay up a hopefully meagre sum and continue to display their support for necessary causes. In other news, it was confirmed on the 8th that sprint races would return once again for 2023, in double the volume this time, with 6 of the 23 rounds next season now sprint race weekends. There are a few sprints making a return from previous years, including Austria and Sao Paulo, Interlagos having now hosted a sprint event in all 3 seasons of their existence. There are also 4 races making a sprint debut, these being Baku, Spa, Qatar and the US Grand Prix, the latter pair to be back-to-back sprints. The increased inclusion of sprint races on the F1 calendar certainly opens up the sport to newer and less experienced audiences, with their fast, swift pace and simplistic nature reeling in new fans. But I think that could eventually take away from the raw and realistic F1 experience. Imagine a sprint race weekend around the streets of Monaco, as opposed to the high-stakes qualifying session relished by even the most critical of what is now considered by many to be a merely processional race. Even so, I'm excited to see what the future of the sprint race might be, and how teams and drivers alike will handle the significant increase in racing, which poses a threat to the durability of certain parts of the cars as the season goes on. Despite my excitement, if the amount of sprint races continues to rise, it could reopen the ugly debates over the cost cap, environmental impact, and the pressure of fans, and how all of these factors affect the sport as a whole. Finally this week, to recap the news of the last month, the Dutch Grand Prix was greeted with a contract extension, also on the 8th, which will see Zandvoort on the calendar until 2025. F1 has blown up in the Netherlands over the past few years, thanks to the continued success of the now 2-time F1 world champion Max Verstappen, a hype only extrapolated with the recent addition of his compatriot Nick de Vries to the F1 grid, thanks to his aforementioned move to AlphaTauri. Now, the Dutch fans have 2 Red Bull-based drivers to cheer for, and despite the race having been somewhat of a snooze fest over the past few years, the vibe is always phenomenal. Thank you for listening to F1 Every Week. Tune in next week for some more winter break F1 news updates.